You probably think of medieval women as helpless, cloistered in stone towers, praying for knights to rescue them. But what if I told you they weren't waiting to be saved at all? In a world ruled by war, plague, and unchecked male power, women created their own systems of protection. Some with herbs, some with whispers, some with blades hidden in hems. Tonight, we slip quietly into their hidden world of silent defenses, coded prayers, and small rebellions disguised as embroidery. Because medieval women weren't powerless, they were just very good at hiding their power. You're walking home just after sunset. The church bells have long since fallen silent, and the narrow cobbled alleyways are cast in a thick, golden dusk. You pull your woolen shawl tighter around your shoulders, your fingers stiff from the chill in the air. But that's not what unsettles you most. It's the silence. In your world, danger is not an abstract threat. It is real, near, and constant. You know the rules. You know not to speak too loudly, not to walk alone after dark. You've memorized the creak of every door hinge, the hush of every step. You know which windows can be trusted, which walls have ears, and which eyes in the marketplace linger too long. Because in the Middle Ages, being a woman means being vulnerable, not just to war or famine or disease, but to the quiet kind of danger, the kind that lives inside homes, hides behind locked doors, and walks with familiar faces. There is no police force to protect you, no hotline to call. If a man strikes you, your voice carries little weight, unless your father is wealthy, your brother feared, or your husband unusually kind. But for most women, silence is safer than justice, so you adapt. You begin to carry things, not weapons exactly, but symbols of preparedness. A set of iron keys on your belt, heavy and sharp, not just for locking doors, but for striking if needed. You learn to walk with a staff, not out of frailty, but for defense. You practice moving through crowds with your elbows tight and your eyes down, always listening, always watching. And you are not alone in this. Among women, there is quiet knowledge passed hand to hand like bread. A coded language of warnings and whispers. Mothers teach daughters not just to clean, cook, and pray, but to survive. There is the story of Elsbeth, the herb wife's daughter. She kept dried nettles by her bed, knowing that an infusion of the plant could rouse sleep-heavy limbs if danger came in the night. There's another tale, darker, of a baker's widow who wore small iron scissors beneath her skirt hem. She said it was for her work, but everyone knew better. Even your clothing becomes part of your armor. Laces tightened high, brooches sharp and pointed. A hairpin is not just a decoration. A wimple or veil can hide not just your hair, but the shape of your face. Anonymity can be a kind of shield. And then there is the knowledge of where to walk. Which path avoids the drunkard's inn? Which doorway houses a quiet widow who will let you shelter if you knock softly? You map your safety not in roads or rivers, but in faces, reputations, and instincts. But still, you live with the weight of unspoken rules. You know that if harm comes, it may be written off as fate, or worse, your fault. So you learn to vanish when needed, to make yourself small, to disappear behind the rhythm of daily life. You become fluent in invisibility. At the abbey, you find a kind of peace. The nuns are watchful, stern but safe. Some women choose that life, not out of pure piety, but because the walls of a convent can protect in ways no husband ever could. Inside, there are fewer eyes, fewer hands, and more rules. And sometimes, rules are safety. And sometimes you dream of something better. Of a world where your body is not a burden to protect, where your voice is not dangerous when it rises in anger, where your name is not whispered with shame simply for being heard. But you don't say those dreams out loud. Instead, you protect yourself in quiet ways. In the way you tie your apron, in the trusted neighbor you walk home with, in the fake smile you give to avoid a real threat, in the way you slip out of a room a little too early, or stay behind a little too long. Timing is everything. Survival is not always heroic. Often it's subtle. It's watching, waiting, listening. It's knowing that power in your world is uneven, and that your best weapon is the ability to move unnoticed. This is not weakness, it's strategy. And you, like thousands of other women across the centuries, become skilled in it. Because in the dangerous world of the Middle Ages, protection is not about strength, it's about awareness. And women, forgotten, quiet, and resourceful, learn to defend themselves not with swords or shields, but with silence, foresight, and an unshakable will to endure. You step through a wooden archway, the air cooling as you enter the stone cloister. The hush here is not just silence, it is sanctuary. The world outside may be ruled by men, by their swords and their laws, but here the rhythm of life is shaped by women. Steady hands at prayer, soft footsteps on flagstone, a place where danger cannot follow so easily. This is not your home, but it might be your refuge. A convent, a beguinage, a women's hospital or guild hall. In a medieval world carved by hierarchy and bloodlines, these quiet corners exist because women made them so. They built them not as castles with towers, but as homes fortified with rules, rituals, and community. Sacred spaces, silent shields. You know the stories. In cities like Bruges or Ghent, women formed beguinages, gated enclaves where unmarried or widowed women could live together. Not quite nuns, but not quite ordinary either. They chose a life of devotion, yes, but also one of mutual protection. Behind those gates they taught, they nursed, they weaved, they prayed, and they watched over one another. No man ruled their household, no marriage tied them to danger. Their lives were bound instead by shared labor and quiet resilience. You imagine knocking at the gate of such a place, your fingers trembling. A woman peers through the iron grate, not cold, not unkind. She sees something in your eyes, a bruised heart, a broken tether, and she lets you in. Inside, life is not luxurious, but it is safe. There are gardens to tend, linen to sew, books to copy. The days pass not in fear, but in structure. And for the first time in a long time, your voice can rise above a whisper. Elsewhere, in towns and cities, women's guilds provide similar protection. You might join the Guild of Weavers, Bakers, Midwives. These associations are more than economic. They are a form of sisterhood. In the meeting halls you exchange knowledge. How to birth a breech child, how to treat a burn, how to spot the signs of pestilence before it spreads. You share secrets too, about dangerous husbands, unkind priests, the best herbs to slip into wine to dull a man's rage. You help one another, not loudly, not publicly, but with an understanding forged from centuries of knowing that no one else will come to your defense unless you do. And then there are the healers, the women who live at the edge of the forest or tucked behind market stalls. Some call them wise women, others call them witches. You visited one, once, an older woman with a basket full of dried yarrow, her hands stained with tinctures. She taught you how to make a salve for bruises. She taught you the names of plants that can bring a fever down or stop a pregnancy from ever beginning. She, too, is part of the invisible web women have woven across the Middle Ages, a net of knowledge, passed from mouth to ear, from mother to daughter, from sister to sister. In towns plagued by violence or instability, women sometimes pool their coin to rent a house together. It is not grand, but the door locks from the inside, and that matters more than beauty. Within, each woman watches the other's back. They form shifts at the window. They sleep with knives beneath pillows. They create rules. No men after sunset, no secrets about visitors. Always share food. It is survival through solidarity. You understand now. Women didn't just hide from danger. They reshaped their world around it. They carved out small kingdoms of safety inside a culture that rarely gave them any. Some of those kingdoms were made of stone and prayer. Others were made of routine and rules. But all were built on the same foundation: trust. Trust between women. Even in the worst of times, through war, famine, plague, this trust remained. You've heard of the women of Siena, who during the Black Death formed informal care circles. When no one else would touch the sick, these women bathed them, fed them, sang to them as they died. And when one of their own fell ill, they stayed beside her. And there were laws, occasionally, odd, fragile things, crafted to protect certain women. In some towns, a woman running a brothel could petition the city for protection. In others, midwives were granted small immunities for their essential work. Not perfect, not fair, but glimmers. All of this, you realize, was a kind of resistance. Not the loud kind with banners and swords, but the slow resistance of care, of crafting safe places in a world that never handed them over willingly. The convent, the guild, the healer's hut, the communal home, the beguinage. These were the fortresses women built, not from stone alone, but from loyalty, memory, and shared pain. And they endure, not in ruins or statues, but in the stories passed down, in the way women still instinctively gather in circles, still whisper secrets in kitchens, still know who to call when everything goes wrong. Because protection is not always a wall or a weapon. Sometimes it's just knowing someone is waiting on the other side of the door. The candlelight flickers against the stone wall as you sit in silence, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders. Not just for warmth, but for cover, for anonymity. It isn't always strength or sanctuary that keeps a woman safe. Sometimes it's the art of becoming invisible, or becoming someone else entirely. You've learned this through experience. Because in a world where you can be married off without consent, accused without defense, or silenced without a word in your favor, there are moments when survival means pretending. You think of her, the miller's daughter who disappeared one winter and returned in spring dressed as a boy, calling herself Thomas. She walked straighter, spoke less, worked beside men in the fields and never once let them see her flinch. They thought her strange but left her alone. And that was the point. Disguise gave her safety, gave her space to breathe. In medieval Europe, this wasn't a tale whispered once. It was a pattern. Women who dressed as men to travel alone, to escape forced marriages, to reach monasteries or ships or courts that otherwise would bar them. Some even took holy vows in disguise. Nuns in habit by day, former soldiers or fugitives by history. Their stories made it into manuscripts, margins filled with half scandal, half awe. The world didn't know what to do with women who refused to stay in place, so they vanished into new identities. You don't need a full costume to change the game, though. Sometimes it's about speaking differently, lowering your voice, avoiding eye contact, pretending you don't understand Latin, or that you understand too much of it. These are codes, not of speech, but of survival. You recall the merchant's wife who handled her husband's books in secret. She spoke only to his clients through the curtain while he was away. They never saw her face, only heard her confident instructions. She protected herself not through absence, but through controlled presence. She created a mystery that no one dared challenge. And then there were the women who wrote under male pseudonyms, or left their names off entirely. The ones who recorded midwifery techniques in margins, or who illustrated apothecary guides with coded symbols. In this way, knowledge passed hand to hand, unreadable to those who saw women as incapable of thought. You think of charms, words whispered into cloth or carved into amulets. Some women wore small bags at the waist filled with herbs and Latin phrases, not for fashion but for concealment. A charm against evil, a ward against unwanted attention. No one needed to know. That was the beauty of it. And codes went deeper, in embroidery, in pattern. A dove stitched upside down might mean mourning. A rose with 7 petals, fertility. These were languages men didn't read. You remember your aunt's story. How, when her husband grew violent, she stitched her messages into altar cloths. The priest saw only devotion. But the other women, oh, they knew. The slightly crooked stem, the dark thread beneath the white. They came. They helped. You begin to realize that deception wasn't about dishonesty. It was about reclaiming power in a system designed to deny it. And it wasn't always individual. There were networks, loose and quiet. A woman at the market might press a specific herb into your palm. A midwife might tap her fingers twice before entering your home. Not accidental, not meaningless. When the plague came, some women passed false names to avoid quarantine. Others faked widowhood to gain access to housing rights. And yes, some played the fool, pretending to be slow-witted or deeply pious, to avoid marriage or scrutiny. The performance kept them safe. There's danger in this, of course. Getting caught in disguise could mean punishment, shame, even death. But that risk was sometimes less than the risk of remaining visible. In towns where laws forbade women from learning certain trades, clever ones passed off their work as their brothers or husbands. A painted panel signed with a man's initials. A tapestry sold under a male name. It wasn't vanity. It was survival. And yet, with all this caution, there's also boldness. You admire them. The women who bent rules not just for safety, but for freedom. Who slipped out of windows at night with packs on their backs and never looked back. The truth is, deception was a tool. Like thread. Like fire. Like silence. Not all women used it. But those who did so with care. With precision. With the knowledge that the world rarely let them speak plainly. So they learned to whisper sideways. To cloak their intentions. To move through the world unseen. Until the moment they chose to be seen again. And you, sitting now in this imagined flicker of the past, you can almost feel it in your own bones. That legacy. That intuition. That skill. The medieval woman didn't vanish. She hid. She adapted. She waited. And in the folds of her cloak, tucked just inside the seams, was a story that still hasn't been fully told. You sit quietly, weaving dried mugwort into a slender bundle, hands steady though your breath is tight in your chest. The scent is sharp, earthy, familiar. Not just a ritual, not just an herb, a line of defense. Because in this world, your body is not always your own. It can be claimed, taxed, given away without your consent, made into something to bear children, to satisfy a man, to become property. And so, across centuries of whispered warnings and shared secrets, women have passed down knowledge, not written in books, not taught by priests, but tucked into the folds of aprons and murmured into the ears of daughters. You have learned this from them, from your mother, from the midwife, from the older woman at the edge of the village with more cats than visitors. They have shown you how to protect your womb, not with weapons, but with knowledge. You remember the roots and leaves, pennyroyal, rue, tansy, plants both feared and revered. Used to delay a missed cycle or bring on a late one. Dangerous in the wrong hands, life-saving in the right ones. Not always safe, but what choice was there? The law says your body belongs to your husband, if you have one. The church says it belongs to God, but none of them feel what you feel, beneath your skin, in your belly, in your bones. So women protect each other. You picture the midwife again, strong hands scrubbed with ash and vinegar, muttering Latin prayers half-remembered and fully defiant. She doesn't ask who the father is. She doesn't need to know. What matters is your breathing, your safety, your will. These women are not saints, nor are they witches. They are something harder to name, guardians of bodily wisdom, inherited outside the institutions that tried to erase them. You've seen how girls are taught to sit small, to stay pure, to be obedient. But among themselves, they pass on different lessons. How to lace a corset to look sickly if you want to avoid a suitor. How to fake a fainting spell to delay marriage. How to add just a pinch of crushed valerian to a cup of ale if someone won't take no for an answer. And so much is hidden in the ordinary. A belt strung with amulets, saints' medals, a carved bone, dried lavender. Meant for protection during childbirth, yes. but also protection from judgment, from blame, from being called cursed if something goes wrong. Because when a woman miscarries, it's her fault. When she can't conceive, it's her fault. When she bears too many children, it's still her fault. And so she learns how to guard her body, even from shame. You remember the whispered tales of nuns who brewed teas to suppress desire, of wives who feigned infertility for years to avoid more mouths to feed, of widows who, once free, lived alone at the edge of town and never again submitted to the hands of another. And then there are the physical protections, not just potions, but posture. Girls taught how to sit with a dagger tucked under their skirts, how to carry a needle in the cuff, sharp end pointing out, how to scream with their eyes while their mouths stay silent. You think about chastity belts, not the iron myths from later fantasies, but real sashes and charms and layers of wool meant to say, "Do not touch." And yet sometimes protection means surrendering, but on your terms. You recall the woman in your village who pretended madness to avoid remarriage, her hair uncombed, her laugh too loud. Men left her alone, and when she died, they found all her herbs lined up in careful rows, labeled, dried, sorted. She wasn't mad, she was brilliant, because to protect yourself in a world that sees you as secondary is not selfish, it is sacred. And sometimes safety comes not from the herbs or the tricks, but from sisterhood itself. You remember the circle of women who came to bathe the laboring mother, the ones who stood outside the door, not letting the priest in until it was done. You remember how they sang, not hymns, but old songs from before you could write, and how those songs wrapped around the birthing bed like armor. These women do not always win. Some are burned, some are banished, some are forgotten. But their knowledge endures, in your hands, in your choices. You touch the bundle of mugwort again, tie it with red thread. It is small, quiet, fragrant, but it holds centuries of defiance. In every leaf, a lesson. You have power, even when the world says you do not, and now you know how to wield it.
You rise before dawn. The village still sleeps. Dew glistens on the thatch, and the sky is the soft blue-gray of secrets. You wrap your wimple tightly, pin your veil just so, and slip out with the beads of your rosary swinging gently at your waist. You do not carry a sword. You do not ride out on horseback. But you, like many women before you, are armored, not in steel, but in symbols. Because in this world, the most dangerous thing is not always the brute with the club. It is the whisper that stains your name, the gaze that follows too long, the question you can never fully answer. Is she proper? So, you cloak yourself in something stronger than chainmail. You wear piety like a second skin. You speak softly in public, bow your head at the right moments, cross yourself when you pass the chapel. Not because you are weak, but because you understand the unspoken rules. A woman who prays is safe. A woman who fasts, who attends Mass, who wears the colors of the Virgin, blues and whites, simple and modest, is not likely to be harassed. She is seen as godly, untouchable. It is a calculated invisibility. You have seen others do it too. The widow who turns her home into a shrine, incense curling from every window. The young girl who joins the beguines, not quite nuns, not quite wives, living together in quiet resistance. The healer who keeps a small altar in her herb room, Saint Apollonia, watching over crushed cloves and bitter teas. Religion is not just salvation. It is camouflage. But you also know there is power in performance. You speak Latin prayers you barely understand, chant psalms with practiced reverence. In a world where men interpret God's voice, you learn to speak just enough of it to protect yourself. Sometimes you use silence as your sword. A quiet woman is assumed to be obedient, devout, good. But silence is a tool. It lets you listen, learn. It lets you avoid confrontation while planning your own path. It hides your fire beneath layers of stillness. You think of the nun who painted manuscripts in the scriptorium. Never spoke above a whisper, but her illuminations told stories, subversive ones, of queens, warrior saints, sly animals, outwitting kings. Her silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Rituals, too, become your shield. You light candles at the same hour every day. You bless the bread before baking. You mark the door with chalk during Epiphany. To outsiders, these are acts of devotion, but they are also acts of power. They mark your space, your rhythm, your authority over the home, over your time, over your inner life. Even your reputation, fragile, precious, becomes armor. You work hard to be known as the respectable one, the woman who helps at births, the one who never gossips, the one who gives coins to the poor even if you can barely feed yourself, because a good reputation is currency. It protects you from suspicion, from slander, from being turned away when you need help. And if danger comes knocking, someone will speak on your behalf. She's not like that. She's always been a good Christian. Leave her be. You remember the cautionary tales. The woman who was too loud, too free, too fond of dancing. When she vanished, no one asked questions. When her garden was burned, no one helped. And so you walk a careful line, free only in private. But in that privacy, you are yourself. You sing while spinning wool. You dance barefoot in the kitchen. You tell stories to children that the priest would not approve of. And sometimes you lock the door, place the statue of the saint backward on the shelf, and speak to your ancestors instead. Because not all protection comes from the church. Some comes from the old ways, the ways that still live in your blood, in your grandmother's locket, in the charm stitched into the hem of your dress, in the whispered prayers in a language older than Latin. You are not alone in this balance. Women across the land are performing the same dance, between obedience and autonomy, between ritual and reality. And there is a quiet strength in it. You see it in the abbess who refuses to marry off the girls in her convent, in the washerwoman who prays at the river but also spits in it to curse the Lord who raised the rents, in the lady who donates to the cathedral but funds a hidden school for girls behind her manor walls. Each of them wears a different shield. Some shine with gold. Some are stitched in linen. Some are made of nothing but words and gazes and the long memory of women who refuse to be broken. And now you are part of them. You light your candle one more time as the sky lightens. Your day will be full of chores, of prayers, of pretending and protecting. But beneath your wimple, behind your quiet eyes, there is fire, and no one sees it unless you want them to. If you've made it to the end of this journey, thank you. Women throughout history have always found ways to resist, even when denied weapons, rights, or voice. If this story resonated with you or taught you something new, consider leaving a comment below. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that quiet strength is still strength. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, rebellion, and forgotten wisdom. Until next time, may your shield be strong and your story remembered.